Revisiting movies from your childhood can be a really fun thing to do because you're able to pick up on maybe some symbolism or themes that kind of went over your head as a kid. And now that you have more life experience, you're more educated and you just have generally more awareness of the world. I feel like it can be really fun to watch movies from your childhood and see if there's anything you missed or maybe didn't associate with the movie. A movie that I love to revisit pretty much every year in October is Monster House from 2006, directed by Gil Kenan, I believe it is. I feel like people either know this movie or they don't. And most people that know this movie associate it with Cartoon Network because I'm pretty sure they played it pretty much every year after its theatrical release. I feel like this movie was a big part of a lot of people's childhoods. I never really see it get the recognition it deserves. Like, you always see people talk about Coraline and Paranorman, which are two of my favorite movies. I won't hide that. But I also really love Monster House because I feel like this movie has a lot of themes and symbolism going on that resonates not only maybe with a child, but also adults watching the movie. So I just kind of wanted to bring some light to this movie and maybe what I picked up on watching it now as an adult is something that you never thought of with the film. This is director Gil Kenan's directorial debut, and he had such a clear vision for what he wanted to do. They put so much care and passion into translating it. One thing that's really cool is Dan Harmon, one of the co-creators of Rick and Morty, and then a gentleman named, I believe it's Rob Schrab, who has directed episodes of Workaholics, Parks and Rec, Blue Mountain, and a bunch of other shows. They actually had written a short story about a monster house, and they co-wrote this film together. And I feel like that really explains the kind of clever humor and some of the more adult jokes made in the film. And having that humor really helps this movie not only be friendly to kids, but also kind of tone back the horror within the film. Another really cool thing about this movie is there's an incredibly stacked cast. So director Gil Kenan had a wish list of actors for this film, and one of his teammates told him, like, this is just a wish list, don't expect everybody to say yes. Every actor that they reached out to said yes to the project. I think that's so cool because at the time, motion capture was relatively new and a lot of these actors had no experience with it, and they all were willing to be outside their comfort zone, learn something new, and still have fun while doing it. And I feel like that translates really well into the characters. Like, looking at the behind the scenes of this film, you can really tell it was a fun environment. It was, everybody's kind of learning, so there was no judgment or like people being mad at each other for not knowing what they're doing. I really think a lot of the chemistry between the actors translates well into the film. And I'm not talking about just like up and coming actors, like they had Mitchell Musso playing the lead character DJ, but they also got people like Catherine O'Hara, Steve Buscemi, Fred Willard, and just all of these people. They got John Heder, and he was just coming off of Napoleon Dynamite. So, they had some up and comers as well as some big names, and, not one person outshines the other in terms of the voice acting, which is really cool. Everybody gives very strong performances. I just want to talk about this movie because I recently watched it and I kind of was able to pick up on more of the themes and symbolism from within the film that as a kid totally went over my head. And I just really feel like this movie isn't loved and appreciated for the whimsical, spooky introduction to horror film that it is. Considering this movie is almost 20 years old now, it looks amazing. I think of movies like Hoodwinked from kind of around that same time frame, and how rough they look would be a nice way of putting it. And to visit a film like Monster House just shows you how much passion went into the film. budget and the team definitely comes into play as well. But Monster House definitely had a team that cared a lot about the finished product coming out of their hands. For Monster House, they decided to use motion capture to make the film. And at the time, it was relatively new. And I am so glad that they did because motion capture adds such a lifelike feel to the movie. The characters' movements are a lot more fluid. There's a lot more detail to each character, from their facial expressions, how they walk, their build. It just makes the movie feel more lively. I totally see why video games in the modern times use motion capture, because even back in 2006 it was impressive. So, nowadays it's even more realistic feeling. But I wish animation would revisit motion capture. I'm sure it's expensive to do, but look at the current animated children's films we have. They're either sequels, prequels, remakes, CGI live action. What I love about Monster House is it is just such a creative, unique, original idea. And I feel like that's missing in today's world of children's animated films. This movie is beautiful. I really love the skyline shots they'll do of the neighborhood, or even just the first scene of the movie of looking at the trees, following the leaf as it glides towards the little girl on the tricycle, and all the leaves, the color. It is just such a visually stunning film that isn't afraid of being different, of its characters looking like caricatures, of everything kind of having this slightly off feel to it. And there's just overall a lot of detail in the overall environment, whether you're in DJ's room, outside in the neighborhood, in Nebercracker's basement. There is just detail oozing from every single scene of this movie. I also really love the humor that is placed throughout the film. It is times very childish, which I love. It is a children's movie, and you have these two young teen boys acting like young teen boys, and it's really funny. And then there's also a couple of adult jokes that they slip in. So I'm really glad that they had two writers with, I would say like comedy backgrounds, or they're like partial to writing in a more comedic style. There's also really great writing in the more heartfelt scenes. The emotions and the problems that these characters are facing are portrayed very well. Overall, this movie just does a really good job of capturing kind of that coming of age, being a young teen, but wanting people to treat you like an adult and view as an adult. The main character, DJ, I feel like is such a great catalyst for this. Like, he's such a great example of this, because he wants to be more mature. He has this problem he's worried about, and nobody's taking him serious. And you see him demonstrate trying to be mature by how he talks to his babysitter, how he tries to impress the girl selling candy in his neighborhood, Jenny, and not wanting to go trick-or-treating. And he's trying to come off as much like an adult as he can, but there's these smaller details in the film that show you how much of a child he still is. His room is very childish. He has a favorite stuffed animal still, his little bunny. He's trying to impress a girl by acting not like himself. And you just have this really well-written character that shows what it's like to be a young teen, of wanting to be mature, wanting to be seen as an adult and take on these responsibilities. But at the end of the day, you are still just a kid. Maybe you are still immature, and that's fine. And what I love about this movie is it kind of has a theme of holding on to that immaturity and enjoying being a child, because at the end of the day, after this crazy experience that he went through, he decides to go trick-or-treating with his best friend. I love that it comes back to that at the very end, because you see this kid go through a really weird traumatic thing, and instead of trying to act different or be more mature, he decides to go trick-or-treating with his best friend. And I think that is the perfect way they could have ended this story for DJ. I feel like this film is just a great coming of age film. It's really hard to find kids movies nowadays that feels like they understand what it is to be a kid and the trials and tribulations that you go through when trying to mature and trying to come into your own. What I really want to talk about is the B plot to this movie, because when I was just a dumb little kid, I didn't pick up on the amount of detail within the storytelling of Nebuchadnezzar's storyline. Watching it as an adult, you see how like subtle they were about it, which I think is really cool, and you kind of really got to like pay attention. Nebuchadnezzar is DJ's neighbor, and this is a very bitter, hostile old man who is kind of cruel to children, and if anything of theirs lands on his property, he's taking it and probably damaging it in some kind of way. DJ's whole concern is his mean, bitter neighbor's behavior. Throughout the film, you get to learn Nebuchadnezzar's story. Like, there's rumors that he fattened up his wife so that he could eat her, has taken toys for what we can assume to be at least a decade. So he's been at it for a long time. Once DJ Chowder and Jenny are in Nebuchadnezzar's house, you see that it is barren, but the detail they decide to put in it's just great. Like, at one point, the kids are kind of in like the main entrance of the home, and you just see a pile of like ammunition, explosive gear. And that makes sense because he was a demolitions expert in the military. But like, why is that just chilling in the main entrance of your home? Later on in the film, we kind of get an exposition dump from Nebuchadnezzar about how he met his wife, Constance, at a freak show. She was unfortunately the fat lady in the show. As he's able to approach her and have time alone with her, they fall in love, they get married. He basically rescues her from this unfair lifestyle, and they go to start their life. They start building a home, and while their home's being constructed on Halloween during that time, these kids come and they egg the framing of the house, which is kind of silly. This is very upsetting to Constance. You know, she has been treated very cruelly and unfair by society. She's been probably isolated most of her life. She probably, doesn't have like formal education or anything like that. So she's very sensitive to things. She overreacts to these kids egging the framing of her home, and a weird freak accident occurs that causes a cement mixer to pour after she has fallen into the foundation of the home, and that's how her spirit intertwines with the house. After this exposition dump, if you picked up on the previous details, it kind of makes sense. While the kids are exploring Nebuchadnezzar's house, they go down into the basement to investigate, and they find her corpse entombed in the cement, but her cage, her prison from when she was in the freak show, is put around her body, and it's locked. Like, it's a big padlock too, shaped like a heart, and there's like chains. So it kind of indicates that Nebuchadnezzar hadn't been visiting her, especially once the kids get into the cage. They find a shrine to Constance with a bunch of old pictures, candles that had previously been burnt but clearly hadn't been for a while. You kind of get the sense that Nebuchadnezzar wasn't really visiting her. Maybe he had become resentful towards her in a way. So as a kid, I did not notice that at all. And I feel like that is such powerful symbolism, how she was imprisoned in her living life, and now in a way she is imprisoned in her afterlife. And to go back to the ammunition being in the entrance of the house, I think Nebuchadnezzar knew he couldn't do this for his whole life. He's old and ailing. He literally has a heart attack in the movie. And I think he was always prepared to exit himself out of life when the time came, because he knew that Constance would just be a terror and she would be a true threat to people. So the only solution, if he's not there to take care of her in the house would be to destroy the house as well as himself when he can no longer take care of it. And like, that is just so deep, man. Nevercracker's story is such a good example of like what loss and trauma and holding on to things that, although are important and are sincere to who you are, sometimes it's healthier to let go and, see what new opportunities can come your way. Towards the end of the film, Constance gets really pissed off at the kids, and she actually uproots the foundation of the house pretty much using trees and is able to be mobile now. But she's chasing the kids as well as Nevercracker. We see Nevercracker running, and he like grabs an ammunition can that Constance had previously, I guess, threw up from her weird house mouth. And you see him grab dynamite and slide it into his sling. So he is like fully prepared to, in a way, kill his wife to save these kids. And I think that is so powerful because throughout the movie, you see Nevercracker being hostile and bitter, and you learn how he's just been defending his home and his wife, and he's actually just been protecting kids in his own weird way. And now, at the end of the film, once the kids are like, hey, we know what's wrong with your house, and things like that, he chooses these kids over imprisonment that Nevercracker's been in for the last however many decades. Like, he's just as much been a prisoner as Constance has, because he wasn't able to remarry, he wasn't able to move, he could barely leave his home. In a way, Nevercracker was just as much imprisoned as Constance was. So I love the redemption that Nevercracker gets of choosing these kids over his wife that he had been so devout to for however many years. And as a kid, I just didn't notice all the subtle details that went into his story about holding on and being willing to hold on till the end. And when that end point comes, being willing to take yourself out, as well as this trauma or this literal monster house. So I really love this plot line. I low-key cried when I first realized it and really thought about why he would go through all this trouble, why he had demolition devices in his front entrance, and just I think he earned his redemption. I really do. And I love the ending, how DJ and Nevercracker make peace and they're giving out toys and people's belongings back to them. I really feel like the B plot is almost like a reflection of the A plot, so DJ's storyline, because Nevercracker is an old man. He's an old dog who's not going to learn any new tricks. He, is set in his ways. Whereas DJ is trying to be more mature, trying to be a different person. And at the end of the day, Nevercracker has to make a difficult decision and break out of his comfort zone, basically change his whole life and become a different person. Whereas DJ, at the end of the film, decides to hold on to his youth. He decides to go trick-or-treating and kind of let go of the idea of, I need to be an adult right now. I need everyone to treat me like an adult. After he went through a very weird experience that even most adults wouldn't be able to handle. I really love the B plot of this movie. I don't think it gets enough credit for how deep and heartfelt it is, how, a lot of adults could resonate with Nevercracker's story. I really think this is well thought out storytelling. Monster House is definitely not like a super scary film. It's definitely creepy and eerie and has this dark whimsy kind of feel to it that is a great appeal to kids. They use visuals and sounds to build up that creepy eeriness. Like, there's a scene where DJ is falling asleep in his room and you see this shadow of the house come into his room and this hand emerges from the house. The room has this red lighting to it, and it's a very ominous scene. They also designed the actual house very uniquely, and it feels they utilize the whole house to be the monster, if that makes sense. I think it's really cool how what you would assume would be parts of the house, like the windows are eyes, the front door is the mouth, the long carpet to the entrance is the tongue. But then there's also other details like it's like a chandelier or something like that is the uvula, or the trees on either side of the house are actually able to be used as arms. And I just liked how much nuance there was to the design of the monster. Definitely kind of scary as a kid seeing the front door turn into these mangled teeth. So I think it's really fun. I think the scariness of the house is quite fun even as an adult, and definitely a bit more on the scary side as a kid. There's definitely a lot of silliness to this movie, and like I said, a lot of kind of that dark whimsy energy. And I think this is a great movie for kids who are interested in getting into horror, or maybe you have someone in your life that wants to get into scary movies, because I feel like although this isn't a horror movie and it's not gory, it's not, offensive or very explicit, it is a good example of how you can have a meaningful story that uses elements of horror, or I guess in this case, kind of like fear, just general uneasiness, to help elevate a story like coming of age or letting go. Because not only do modern animated kids films lack the ability to have meaningful storytelling, but I feel like a lot of horror movies nowadays don't really have any powerful messaging that can resonate with people, or they're too blatant, or they're too political with what they're trying to say. I feel like telling a human story, a story anybody could relate to or find sympathy with, it's kind of rare nowadays. So I love this movie because it's very well rounded. It's creepy and eerie, kind of scary, but there's lots of silly humor and relatability that it falls back on. The whole plot line with Nevercracker, a lot of adults, I think, could resonate with that or have sympathy towards his storyline and redemption. So I think this is a great film for kids who want to get into horror, or you're just looking for a movie that isn't, soulless, it's not meaningless with what it's trying to say, or it's not too, I guess, like political in its messaging, or, it doesn't feel forced in any kind of way. I will say, though, there are some negatives to this movie. I know, I just glazed the hell out of this movie, and I'm going to talk about, some things that kind of make it not bad necessarily, but they're, the weak points in the film. So there's quite a few plot holes, like the house not being seen by anybody else in the neighborhood as it's transforming into the monster is kind of silly. DJ's parents are gone, so that covers that, but there's other neighbors in the neighborhood. And then there's like another point where DJ's babysitter Z opens the front door as the house is actively trying to eat Jenny, and it has the walkway up to the front door like elevated into the air, and as Z opens the door, it like starts slamming down these cement platforms. How did she not notice that? You know what I mean? And so that, if you don't pay too much attention to that, it's whatever. But, if you let that eat at you, you definitely won't enjoy this film as much. The character design, I personally love. I really am into kind of that Tim Burton-esque, Leica Studios, weird proportions characters. I think it's very charming and unique, but I could see other people not enjoying the look of the characters or thinking that the CGI isn't that great, which I totally respect. And then I do feel like the ending is a bit rushed, but nothing detrimental, but it does feel like it's kind of quickly wrapped up, which is fine. And I do like how during the credits there's an epilogue, and you kind of get to see where all of the side characters end up, like Z and Skull end up getting together. The cops that the house takes, they just kind of act like nothing happened and they're going to go inspect some candy from trick-or-treaters. And like, I like that they include what happened to those side characters, but the ending otherwise feels pretty rushed. I feel like that's kind of why they included the epilogue. Other than that, I really have no complaints about this movie. I think it's amazing. I wish it got more recognition, kind of to the same level of like Paranorman and Coraline, because this, it feels like Monster House walked so that Paranorman and Coraline could run. You know what I mean? Definitely go check this movie out if you haven't seen it, or if you watched it as a child and you want to revisit it, or maybe you have your kids of your own now. Like, definitely share this movie with them. I feel like it has such a great story. It has beautiful animation in my eyes, and it's just one of those movies that I think is timeless. I think over time, more and more people will start to appreciate it. Thanks for listening to me ramble about this movie. I really appreciate you guys listening to me. So I will catch you in the next one.